Captain Hook, the man doomed to die, versus Peter Pan, the boy who would never grow up. Welcome to the Peter Pan Lore YouTube channel. You may have joined us from TikTok, where I am Peter Pan Lore and Peter Pan Facts. We now have long form videos, so welcome to the long form videos here on YouTube. If you're not following me on TikTok, then go jump over there and do so. It's Peter Pan Lore and Peter Pan Facts. Go follow me over there. I try to post fun facts and comments and answer your questions every day if I can do, and I jump into the lore, but on this channel we can do it for way longer because we have much longer to do it and we can do big video essays. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. This is brand new, so it's going to be one of my things that I love to talk about the most, and that is the dynamic between Captain Hook and Peter Pan. My main aim in this video essay, as a Peter Pan enthusiast who loves this lore and source material far too well and knows it far too well, is to talk about why Peter Pan gets to live and why this choice continues to happen for him, versus why Captain Hook is seemingly doomed and has to die. I'm going to start then briefly with a quick introduction to both characters, the things that you need to know, and a little bit about each character's backstory and history. We're going to start with Peter. Peter ran away from home when he was 7 days old. He did this because in J.M. Barrie's lore, all children were once birds, and Peter, as a very small baby, remembered that he used to be a bird and wanted to fly once again, and so he had this belief that he could, and so he could, and he flew all the way to Kensington Gardens, where he lived for a while amongst the fairies and the birds. He learned how to be a bird, and he spoke to the wise old Solomon Caw, who was another bird, and through this conversation, Peter learned that he is not exactly human anymore, but he's not exactly bird anymore either. And Solomon Caw described Peter now as a betwixt and between, a poor little half and half. And of course, Peter ended up loving his new state as a betwixt and between, and that is how we know him now and how he has been ever since that moment. Over time, Peter will have left Kensington Gardens for longer and longer periods of time. He will have flown further and further away. We know that at some point he accompanies shoals of mermaids halfway around the world. We know that at some point he got to the Neverland and he set up a hideout there and ended up taking in lost boys and hanging out with them. He goes off on different adventures. He goes to try and blow out the stars. He goes following mermaids across the world. He is said to accompany deceased children part of the way to the afterlife so they won't be frightened. Now, J.M. Barrie talks a little bit about the riddle of Peter Pan's existence, and part of this is how he will forget pretty much everyone and everything, every experience he has had, all the adventures. Within about a year of the Darling children leaving the Neverland at the end of the story, Peter Pan has forgotten completely about Captain Hook and Tinkerbell, despite his strong attachment to both of them, either as best friend or as foe. And so the fascinating way that Peter does get to live his life as the boy who will never grow up and the betwixt and between, the not quite human, not quite bird, is that he forgets all of his adventures, but he constantly gets to have new ones. Then we have the character of Captain Hook, Captain James Hook, or Captain Jas Hook, as he wrote himself. The little that we know about Captain Hook comes primarily from the novel and the play, but also a little bit from things J.M. Barrie wrote of him outside the novel as well. J.M. Barrie wrote an entire speech called Captain Hook at Eton, and this is because, in the novel and the play, we learn that Captain Hook attended Eton School. This is where he learned about something that would become a huge part of his character as he grew and aged, and that is the notion of good and bad form. We also know that Captain Hook is said to be the only man that the Sea Cook feared. The Sea Cook is Long John Silver. And we also learn that Captain Hook served under Blackbeard as a member of his crew. At some point, Captain Hook arrived on the Neverland. He met Peter Pan. The two instantly took a dislike to each other. They fought, and at some point in their history, Peter Pan chopped off Captain Hook's right arm and threw it to the crocodile. And Captain Hook has worn a hook ever since, and of course been pursued by the crocodile, who enjoyed the taste of his flesh so much she just wants more. So that is a very brief history of both of these characters. If you'd like me to go into them in much more detail in their own separate videos, I can do, but right now we don't have time. So we're going to move on to the next bit, which is comparing these two characters. What drives them and what drives them in different directions and makes them so unable to get along with each other? The main things that drive Peter seem to be a desire to always have fun. As he says many times, I want always to be a little boy and to have fun. Everything is play to him. J.M. Barrie describes how to Peter, real and pretend are one and the same, and he cannot tell the difference. So to him, everything is just this big play and this adventure. Something else that drives Peter is a sense of fairness and fair play. I will dive into what this means in a moment. For now, let's talk about Captain Hook. The main things that seem to be driving the Captain Hook at the stage in life that we meet him in the play and the novel is primarily this desire and this sense of good and bad form. This was taught to him at Eton School and it has remained with him ever since. He wants to show good form. He judges other people, checking whether they are showing good or bad form, but it is mostly internalized. He turns this on himself many times. He wants to show good form and for others to view him as having and showing good form. And it is constantly something playing on his mind, particularly up until the very end of his life. The other thing that is driving Captain Hook at this point in the story is his obsession. His obsession with the boy Peter Pan and with ending that boy's life. Now that we know what is driving these two characters, let's talk about how this drives them apart. I'm going to start this time with Captain Hook and talk about his obsession with Peter Pan. Where did this come from? Well, J.M. Barrie tells us. In chapter 12 of the novel, he says this: Peter was such a small boy that one tends to wonder at the man's hatred of him. True, he had flung Hook's arm to the crocodile, but even this, and the increased insecurity of life to which it led, owing to the crocodile's pertinency, hardly account for a vindictiveness so relentless and malignant. The truth is that there was a something about Peter which goaded the pirate captain to frenzy. It was not his courage, it was not his engaging appearance, it was not... There is no beating about the bush, for we know quite well what it was, and have got to tell. It was Peter's cockiness. This had got on Hook's nerves, and it made his iron claw twitch, and at night it disturbed him like an insect. While Peter lived, the tortured man felt that he was a lion in a cage into which a sparrow had come. So by this point in the story, by this point in Captain Hook's life, we know that he now has his bitter obsession with destroying Peter Pan, not because he's the boy that chopped off his arm, but because he is so damn cocky and annoying. We also know from Captain Hook himself in chapter 5 of the novel that Captain Hook has left the Neverland before. Since he first met Peter, since they first clashed, and since Peter chopped off his arm, the crocodile is now pursuing Hook. And Hook describes to Mr. Smee that the crocodile has pursued him from land to land and from sea to sea, meaning that after he got his hand chopped off, he left the Neverland. He could have left Peter well enough alone, he could have ignored it, he could have got on with his life, but no, still being pursued by this crocodile, Captain Hook chose to return to the Neverland. Time and time again, he went from land to land and sea to sea. He went back and forth to various different places, but always he dragged his crew back to the Neverland because of his obsession with destroying Peter Pan. Again, not as retribution for his lost hand, but because he just can't stand him. He allowed his hatred and obsession to grow and grow inside him until it kept him there on the Neverland, trying and failing to murder Peter Pan, and led him to more dark and desperate measures, which ultimately led to the end of his life. In the next section, I'm going to talk about how Captain Hook is himself responsible for stacking all the dominoes in place that eventually toppled and led to his own demise. But first, let's talk about Peter for a moment. So I mentioned that Peter is driven not just by his sense of always wanting to have fun, but, which is very pertinent for this video essay, his sense of fairness and fair play. Now, if you follow my TikTok, you might have seen a series I've done called Can They Visit the Neverland?, where people give me characters and I use my knowledge of the lore in the story to guess whether or not the Neverland would allow them to visit. And this is because the Neverland itself is almost its own entity and a separate character entirely in the story. J.M. Barrie talks about how you can't just go to the Neverland. There are no directions to it. No, Disney added the star. There is no second star to the right. It doesn't exist. There's no directions to it. If you want to reach the Neverland, the island has to be out looking for you, and the island has to allow you to visit. Even the Darling children have a difficult time at first. Peter has to beat his fists on seemingly thin air, and he says that they don't want us to land. Something about the island wasn't quite sure at that point. So this sense of fair play and fairness that Peter has within him is a big part of the Neverland itself as well. It's difficult to say whether one affected the other more. I don't think the island is completely beholden to Peter, it doesn't completely bend to his whims, but also Peter definitely, as a non-native of the island, isn't going to be driven by it completely as well. So in a way, I think they both affect and lean on the other, but really they both just happen to have a good sense of fair play, and that's why Peter and the Neverland work and cooperate so well together. I'm going to take you into this story a bit now, and I'm going to show you some key moments where Peter is showing his sense of fairness and fair play. In chapter 4, when the Darling children and Peter and Tink are reaching the Neverland, Peter offers them whether they want to have an adventure or have their tea first, and John asks what kind of adventure. Peter shows them that there's a pirate asleep in the trees beneath them, and if they like, they could go down and kill him. John then gets afraid and asks Peter, well, what happens if the pirate wakes up? To this, Peter is indignant, and he says, you don't think I would kill him while he was sleeping? I would wake him first and then kill him. That's what I always do. Another key moment comes in chapter 8. Peter and Wendy and the Lost Boys have been on Maroona's Rock in the Mermaid Lagoon, and then they see the pirate dinghy coming with Smee and Starkey and a captured tiger lily, who they intend to leave on Maroona's Rock to drown. Now, Peter is incensed by this because of its unfairness and how it is 2 against 1, and that is what determines him to go and help rescue Tiger Lily. The next moment comes very quickly in the same chapter and on Maroona's Rock once again. The Lost Boys and the pirates are all fighting, and during this fight, Peter and Captain Hook both climb onto the rock on separate sides without realizing the other one is there. When they lock eyes, Peter gnashes his teeth and they get ready to fight. However, Peter realizes that he is higher up on the rock than Captain Hook is, and J.M. Barrie describes it would not have been fighting fair. So Peter offers the pirate a hand to help him up, showing his sense of fairness. And another moment, still in the same chapter, and again on Maroona's Rock. Peter and Wendy have found themselves completely alone after the fighting. There is no one around. They cannot escape. Peter is wounded. He cannot fly or swim, and Wendy is too weak and tired. They believe they are about to drown on the rock. However, Michael's kite comes drifting past on the wind, and Peter grabs it and ties it around Wendy's waist. He wants her to fly away on the kite to safety. And when Wendy, bless her heart, offers to draw lots because it can't lift both of them, Peter says, no, you're a lady, and gives her the kite, ties it around her, and sends her off to survive, leaving himself destined to die on the rock. There are several other smaller moments that I could talk about, but this video is already getting far too long, so I'm going to swap back with the sense of fairness and fair play, and I'm going to talk about Captain Hook in relation to those particular moments I just talked about with Peter Pan. Remember that earlier moment I spoke of where Peter is offering to kill a pirate with John, and John worries that the pirate might wake up, and Peter says, well, of course I'd wake him up first. I wouldn't kill them while they're sleeping. Compare this then to Captain Hook later on in the story. He has found a way down into the Lost Boys' hideout and discovers Peter Pan asleep on the bed. However, here their differences in character really show themselves, because Peter immediately was insulted that he would not wake a pirate up before he killed them. Captain Hook is only stopped from murdering the boy in his sleep because he can't get through the door at the bottom of the tree. He is too big, and this is why he ends up poisoning the medicine cup instead. And now we're going to go back to Maroona's Rock, because there is a lot to say about Maroona's Rock. First of all, Captain Hook was perfectly fine sending 2 of his men with 1 tiger lily to go to the rock, and then he himself also arrived, making it 3 against 1. But the most important thing to note about the Maroona's Rock scene is how Captain Hook behaved after Peter had offered him a hand to help him up the rock. And how does Captain Hook respond to this gesture? With his own show of fairness, he has just seen that Peter is showing very good form, something he himself is trying to live by and looks for in other people. Does he show good form back, take the boy's hand and fight fair? No, he does not. Instead, Captain Hook seizes the unfair opportunity and raises his claw and strikes at Peter, not once, but twice. He claws him twice, and the only reason that he cannot finish the job is because the crocodile arrives and he has to flee for his own life. Another really interesting thing to note, just to hop back to the perspective of Peter in this moment, is that J.M. Barrie describes it was not the pain that hurt Peter in this moment, it was the unfairness. Because Peter lives every moment as if it's his first, and he has experienced unfairness before, but he's forgotten about it. And so J.M. Barrie says that to Peter, in this moment on Maroona's Rock, when he has offered a hand and instead been clawed twice, He feels as though that's the first time anyone has been unfair to him, and that's what hits him more. The pain is secondary, the unfairness smacks him, and that is what he's focused on, and that's what hurts him the most. And now we're going to move on to quite possibly the worst thing Captain Hook has ever done in his life. Now this is the moment. This is the biggest domino. This is the one that knocks all the others over. This is what causes Captain Hook's death to come. This is the moment that sets everything else in motion, and once he did this, he cannot turn back. This is what causes Captain Hook to die. This is the reason why the Neverland turns on him. This is why Captain Hook is the man doomed to die. So what did he do? Well, it was Captain Hook leading all of the pirates in an attack against Tiger Lily and her people while they were guarding the home under the ground. To sum it up very, very quickly, Peter Pan rescued Tiger Lily. As a gratitude for this, Tiger Lily and all her people decided they would help defend him against the pirates, so they set up camp outside the home under the ground and they could guard them from any pirate attacks. They were settling down for the night, they had their blankets around them, and this is the moment where Captain Hook decided to attack them. Why did this fight break the rules? Why did this mean Captain Hook had to die? Well, J.M. Barrie tells us. J.M. Barrie describes in chapter 12 that the attack on Tiger Lily and her people had come as a complete surprise, and this is proof that Captain Hook had done it improperly. He says that in all the unwritten laws on the island, it is always Tiger Lily and her people who attack first. And he also says that this was the usual procedure was so well known to Hook that in disregarding it, he cannot be excused on the plea of ignorance. And then he describes that it was a massacre rather than a fight, and so perished most of Tiger Lily's people. And so what Captain Hook did that was so wrong in this instance was not attacking them, but attacking them unfairly. He broke all the rules of play which were well known to him and everybody else who lives on the Neverland, and he attacked wrongly and first and unfairly. And this is the huge domino which I think caused his death. To demonstrate just how quickly and swiftly the Neverland dealt with Captain Hook after this final domino was cast, it was about 10 p.m. when Peter woke up, nearly drank his medicine, and Tinker Bell drank it to save his life. It was 1:30 in the morning when Captain Hook was deceased. So within roughly 3.5 hours of Captain Hook deciding to lead the unlawful and unjust and unfair attack against Tiger Lily and her people, he was dead. There is another thing though, something else that happened at this point in time on the Neverland which I see as absolute final proof that Captain Hook was doomed to die from that decision onwards. Let me explain. So to get the time on the Neverland, you have to go and find the crocodile, and then stay near her and listen for the clock to strike. Count how many strikes, and that's the time. Peter had gone out to get the time that evening, had heard the clock strike, told Wendy the time, and then a little bit later Wendy had decided she was going to go home, and then the pirates had attacked. So we know that the crocodile was ticking and striking the time. You could still hear the clock inside her at that moment. But after Captain Hook had attacked Tiger Lily unfairly, Peter ventures out onto the island and meets the crocodile. And the clock has run down. The crocodile is no longer ticking. Is this not the most beautiful example of your time is up? Your clock has literally stopped. Captain Hook's metaphorical fate clock, whatever, has stopped and run down. The crocodile is no longer ticking. Captain Hook can no longer hear her coming. And when she is in the water, when he throws himself off the pirate ship, he does not know she's there. So you can see why I believe the Neverland Island took direct action to cause Captain Hook's demise after this moment. He sealed his fate, he played unfairly, he broke the rules, and he paid for it with his life. To finish this video essay then, I would like to say that I do not believe that the characters of Captain Hook or Peter Pan are wholly good or evil. This is not a tale of goodness triumphing over evil, of a horrible man versus a good boy. Peter has plenty of badness to him, and I'll go into detail in that in another video. But Captain Hook also has some goodness to him. J.M. Barrie describes it himself, and I will go into this in another video about them both separately if you'd like to. However, Captain Hook allowed his obsession and his hatred to fuel him. And in the end, that's what killed him. It's very interesting how Peter is the boy who will never grow up. And the way that he lives, the riddle of his existence, is that he forgets everything, everyone, all of his experiences. And so the bad experiences like unfairness and the concept of dying, they hit him just as hard every single time, because to him it's the first time and it shocks him. Just as each joy is more brilliant, each sorrow is more painful. However, the interesting thing to note about Peter living in this state is that he constantly chooses fairness time and again. Despite forgetting everyone and everything, he still chooses to offer his hand to the pirate captain to help him up. He still dislikes the unfairness of 2 against 1. He still vows to go and rescue the lost boys from the fierce pirate. He still fights against what he believes to be unfair and is still shocked when other people do not do this. And then we have Captain Hook, the man who, despite growing up and being educated, full of good and bad form and all these noble ideas, is saddled with the burden of memory and existence and hatred and ambition and obsession. And this weighs him down until he himself has bile inside him and he can no longer choose to act fairly. And he sees Peter showing good form time and time again, unburdened by all the things that weigh him down, and this hatred turns into his entire existence. It drags him and his men back to the Neverland over and over again until he makes such terrible decisions in his desperation to just be rid of Peter that he leads himself to his own end. And so that ultimately is why Peter Pan is and will always be the boy who will never grow up, free of any burdening memories or troubles or woes, forever able to just have adventures over and over again and see everything as new and exciting. And Captain Hook is the man doomed to die because of his memory and his obsession, which led him down darker and darker paths until all of his actions became desperate and driven by one tiny thing that ultimately killed him. Well, that is it for today's video essay. I hope you have enjoyed this little dive into the world of the Neverland and the story of Peter Pan. If you haven't been lucky enough to read the story yet, give it a go! And I will at some point be reading out all of the chapters in a video on this channel, so stay tuned for that if you'd like to hear me reading it out to you as well. Alright, have a wonderful, magical day, and I will see you in the next video, I guess.